Welcome back, everybody, to episode 3 of The Clash with my good friend, Madeline. Madeline, welcome back. And this time, I don't even have to say anything regarding comments being bad or something like this. We just decided we need to have an emergency podcast. I wasn't planning on doing this till I get back next week from DC, but I was like, okay, so much stuff has happened.
So much.
The breakup between the richest person in the world and the most powerful person in the world.
Yes.
And you told me you have an interesting conspiracy theory about
do.
that. I think we're going to discuss people's favorite topic of us debating, which is immigration.
Yep.
You know, I've realized, I think we're going to have to talk about some sort of immigration every episode,
Yeah.
right? Because, and what I like about our debates about immigration is that I learn new stuff, you learn new stuff, and we come back and then, hey, we present the episode again with new facts that we learned or different stuff like that. So I'll let you start, actually, because you told me we have to talk about Musk and Trump, and I completely agree with you. But explain to me, what is it? What are you going to surprise me with?
Okay, so here's what I think is going on and what sparked the feud between Trump and Elon. And I'm also going to reference the PBD podcast because these guys, I think, were beating around the bush about it, but they didn't quite hit it. So my thesis is that Elon Musk is in the regulate AI category and that JD Vance and Peter Thiel and David Sachs are not. And in the bill, it says that the states are not allowed to regulate AI.
For 10 years.
Right. And so my belief as to why Elon got into politics to begin with was partially because of the woke mind virus and partially because of regulating AI. I've got quotes from him that go back 10 years where he's saying like AI is a bigger threat to humanity than nukes.
Yeah. I watched that live, actually, that conference that he was holding.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was like 2017 or 2018.
Yep.
And then he had another one recently this year where he talked about it. But he desperately believes in regulating AI and thinks it's a serious threat to humanity. And I have quotes from JD Vance, and I've said this on my own social media. Within the first 6 weeks that JD Vance was vice president, he went to 3 different conferences where he said we need to stop wringing our hands about safety with AI and ethics and start building for the future. And like that was one quote almost, but he sort of repeats, it's the same sentiment at all 3 conferences. One was in Munich, one was in Paris, and then another one was here. They're against it in general. And Peter Thiel's super against regulating AI because he's a survival of the fittest person. And he believes that it's growth at all costs. Like he wrote the book, The Diversity Myth, and he was like anti wokeness since the beginning. But
it's hard to advocate to regulate AI companies or in general AI when you own one of the best AI companies that is receiving the most government contracts right now, Palantir.
Right. So here's the connection between the woke mind virus and the AI thing, right? I've always believed that Elon got into politics because he felt like he lost his son. He felt like he lost his son to
the trans cause.
Yes, which he thinks came from AI. Because he thinks that the algorithms and the AI exposed his son to the idea of being trans and that's why he lost him. And so he believes in regulating AI, not just for that reason, because he believed in it before then, but he saw a major threat to that. That's why I think he spent $280 million or however much it was in the election, because I think it broke him. I think whether you think his child should or shouldn't, doesn't matter. That's why I think he got into the election. And I think that split was like, I think it's a split in Silicon Valley. It's a split in the tech community. But people forget that JD Vance was a big tech venture capitalist and that Peter Thiel funded his Senate campaign. And Peter Thiel now has all of these contracts with surveillance technology for the American public and for the military. So it's a divide. And if I were Elon in that situation, I would go, this is why I got into this in the first place. And now you're getting rid of this in the big, beautiful bill. No. I think he's selling it as, it's the deficit and the debt. But if he cared that much about the deficit and the debt, then Doge would have cut things differently, because actually the cuts only accounted for 0.237 or something percent.
Yeah, very minimal, basically.
of the federal budget, because I don't think it's like he's undoing what Doge did, because I think the point actually wasn't to cut the debt or the deficit. I think it was to minimize the size of the federal government.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's it. I think it actually is the AI regulation thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because that gets to the heart his heart of like why he would react this way and have such a visceral reaction. And just as somebody who studies like human nature as a jury consultant and now comments on it, that's my like human nature approach to this.
It's very interesting, and I like the theory because it's unique. It's a little bit different than what I've been hearing nonstop for the last 4 days, is that it's because of the deficit, right? And it doesn't really make sense because, listen, I told you this last time, if we're bringing the annual deficit down from $1.8 trillion to about $50 billion, I understand that there's still an annual deficit, but that is a fantastic start, right? Like Speaker Mike Johnson always says, you can't solve the issue that we've created over 2-3 decades now overnight.
Sure.
And you especially can't do this over one bill. So it's a great step forward. Now, your theory is actually really interesting because I kind of want to pick your brain about this.
Yeah.
Our favorite over here, my personal, maybe your second favorite, Steve Bannon. I'm not sure if you like Steve Bannon or Stephen Miller more. So maybe you'll go on the record for us here.
But that's a great question.
But both of them, I love them a lot. Anyways, Steve Bannon points out a really interesting thing, that the elite oligarchs, the tech elite oligarchs that have taken over the second administration of Trump is visible to everybody, because you can see it on Elon Musk's side, but then you can also see it on the J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel side because of all the various stuff that they're engaged in, right? But the war that Steve Bannon has waged on was against Elon Musk. It hasn't been against the J.D. Vance, the Peter Thiels and stuff like that. And Steve Bannon, even if he disagrees with President Trump, he's going to be very vocal about it, and he's going to stand firm on his position, which is why he never let go about the Elon Musk things. He's probably the happiest person from the fallout of Musk and stuff like that. So why do you think, if that is the case, if Elon is so anti-AI, right, or not anti-AI, but wants to heavily regulate AI in order for crazy things not to happen, why do you think that Steve Bannon, who also is against it because of the transhumanism aspect of it, why do you think that he hasn't waged war on the J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel side of the camp here that we have?
So this is a very fair question, and I might end up providing an answer that doesn't feel fair because I'm kind of undermining the premise. Because I think that from the beginning that this split between the two was manufactured, because it's another human nature approach. So when you have a bunch of different factions that all coalesce and come together in order to win, like win the fight, which they did with Trump, like there were a bunch of different factions, different kinds of people who came together, you can unite and it feels good. But once you win and that there's no common enemy on the other side, then you start splitting off within your own factions, because it's within human nature to want to identify yourself and like put up your flag. And so if you can control that split by manufacturing one and allowing people to take one side or the other, then you can control it rather than having people split off and letting the Democrats pick people off one by one, if that makes sense. So I think from the beginning it was manufactured. Do I think Steve Bannon likes anyone from another country? No. Do I think Stephen Miller likes anyone from another country? Absolutely not.
So you're saying both of them are against legal migrants as well?
Yes.
Against that. Again, let me ask you this. I understand that they want a 5-year pause on everybody that's coming into this country. I kind of agree with them, and we can discuss that in a little bit because I feel like you completely oppose that.
I don't, actually.
But, okay, that's good.
The time limit or the timing on it, I super oppose. But I was like, if you want to stop things for a minute to get your shit together, can I say get your shit together?
Yeah.
To get your shit together, fine.
Okay. That's a very radical position for Democrats to take. I know you're not a Democrat, but, left-leaning, they are, they don't understand the impact that 10 million illegal immigrants have had on our country in the last few years. And I think that it's a necessary step. But we'll get to immigration in a second. No worries. Yeah. I don't even know. Oh, it's because of the Steve Bannon comment.
Yeah.
I want to bring it back to, in general, the drama. Do you think that Democrats benefited the most from this fallout?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think, right? I'm putting my little tinfoil hat on. Musk wasn't traditionally a conservative. He's not a traditionally conservative. There are some values that overlap with conservatism, like prioritizing nuclear family, understanding how important it is to have kids. But a lot of the stuff like rolling in ketamine and stuff like that isn't a conservative value.
Sure.
So sometimes I look at things like this and I wonder, Is it because of the AI or the deficit, or again, tinfoil hat on? Was this all part of a plan to get as close as possible to Trump, and when the time is right, to create this big chaos? Because chaos in this situation always benefits the Democrats. I mean, totally everything has changed fully to talking about this fight rather than to talk about anything else. And the fight, when you have Musk coming out and making accusations about Trump being in the Epstein files, he didn't see any new files or anything like that, you start to understand why? Why is this happening? And all I could think about is that it's all playing into the hands of Democrats. So is is Musk a Democrat or something,
So I think it's an interesting theory, but I think when you look at the money aspect of it, I think that theory becomes less likely, because he spent $280 million of his own money towards this cause. I don't think that would be to get a non-Democrat
But think about this:
elected.
if he not permanently, but if he, because of this, helps Democrats win for the next 12 years or so, he's going to get favorable EV related grants, contracts, subsidies.
JD Vance is going to win. JD Vance is going to be the next president.
I like it. Hey, you heard it here back in 2025.
And I also said in February that Elon was going to be the fall guy. I knew he was going to be the fall guy, because if anything went wrong, Elon is not an elected official.
Yeah.
He's not on the payroll. He's not. He can go. There's nothing legally holding him there. Not that that's mattered.
And there's a lot of reasons why to go as well, to not make it look like it's because of problems in the White House, right?
Yeah.
I need to return back to Tesla. I need to return back to SpaceX.
Yeah.
And I think that is what's really happening now.
But on PPD's podcast, the thing that they missed, the thing that they got wrong, was they thought that Elon and Peter Thiel are friends, and they're not. They started PayPal together, and the PayPal Mafia Bros. That's true. But Musk was the leader until he left and Peter Thiel took over. And he and Peter Thiel have not been close since. And they're super at odds on regulating AI. And so it really is it's a split of the tech bros. And the theory actually coincides with Trump rejecting Elon's nominee for the NASA position, because he also believes in regulating AI, because he was Elon's guy. So the theory still fits with other things that are going on.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'll have to really look into that, because I do know that there's a split in ideology when it comes down to AI within the administration.
Yeah.
But I thought that that's something that Trump likes. He has the Lindsey Grahams and the Rand Pauls all in one room, basically, right? You're giving him advice. So I thought maybe that's what it is regarding AI, but I really do think that President Trump is more sided on the not regulating AI. It fits into the scope of conservatism, right? Limited government. Let's debate this for a second, and then we'll move on to immigration. Regulating or not regulating AI? China is not going to regulate AI.
Right.
It's not going to pause anything regarding AI for whatever reason. Every single time that we regulate it or impede its process, whatever the case may be, we are hurting ourselves, because I don't necessarily want to live in a world where China possesses the ability to do crazy stuff with AI and we're 10 years behind.
Sure.
So that's something that we have to take into account. What is your biggest fear regarding AI, going unregulated?
That's a great question. And I actually didn't really know what the answer to that was until I came up with this theory, because I was like, well, what are we afraid of here? So I can actually explain it by talking to you about Peter Thiel's company. So
I figured it's revolving around Palantir's kill list.
Well, so it's actually not about the list. It's about the name of the company. So Palantir is it comes from Lord of the Rings, because they're all Lord of the Rings nerds, which is fine. I love Lord of the Rings too. But it comes from a seeing stone, like a seer stone. And the inherent flaw of the Palantir stone is that it presents things from a certain angle, right? And so it has immense power, because you see things from the perspective that it wants to show it to you. And that is, if you live in a democracy, you are dependent upon upon a media telling you the truth about what's going on, so that you can exercise your vote properly and you can respond and protest or whatever it is. But you're entirely dependent on the story being told truthfully. And so I think what he's done by labeling his company this has shown me, right, that his value is in showing people the version that he wants them to see, which is inherently untruthful. And I think that is what I think that's what Trump has done. And that can actually allow us to transition once I hear from you about this, into the immigration thing, because I do think that we have not been told the truth about a lot of things, and that Peter Thiel is a survival of the fittest, growth at all costs, literally like stepping on other people to get to where you need to go kind of person. And they believe that empathy is an inherent flaw. They think that diversity is useless and that empathy is a flaw because it prevents growth at the fastest speed possible. You could argue that diversity allows for more consideration of diverse opinions, which can allow you to grow further. And I would argue that with empathy, if you don't consider empathy when you grow, then you'll grow in the wrong direction, right? But he does not believe in that. He believes in growing as fast as possible, and that's the move fast and break things ethos and like fix it at the end. But the problem is the breaking things now as the head of the federal government is people, and they're creating a surveillance state right now. And I don't think that they're talking about. I know that they're not talking about that on conservative news media, and that really bothers me.
You'd be surprised. I've seen this a lot of times, because one thing that I think a lot of conservatives, a lot of them are bought, but that they still stand on is their values. And when they see a mass surveillance program, regardless where it comes from, they will actually go against it. There are a lot of individuals that I've seen come out on my side of the aisle that are completely opposing anything related to Peter Thiel, Palantir,
MTG.
And they'll point to MTG, right? That's a good perspective. But it's funny enough, right? MTG, I thought you read all your bills, right? I thought you read every word. What do you mean you didn't see this in there? Does this mean that you, like the other congressmen and women, don't actually do anything?
Yeah,
but
as somebody who works in the local legislature, no one reads the bills. Yeah. They do not. But it is true that they do give it to them at the last minute with the changes made. They will give it to them without time to read
And that's
it.
the problem,
That's
right?
accurate.
And then they'll be like, here, read 1,000 pages in 12 hours. And then, by the way, your deadline for your vote is in 15 hours as well. So we'll start in 12 hours and the deadline to vote is in 15. Or less,
yeah.
right? And that's how a lot of pork gets passed. I'm sure. Here's the problem.
They call it a zombie bill.
When you have one big beautiful bill, what do you do when it's one big beautiful bill? You stuff everything that you can in there. And then if you have the president saying we have to pass it, well, that means that a lot of pork, like unregulated AI for 10 years, is going to be instituted without you even knowing. Yeah. But I completely forgot.
You were talking about what the biggest worry you have with unregulated AI is.
My biggest worry with unregulated AI actually doesn't exist, to be honest with you, because the majority of the arguments that are here revolve around the workplace, labor practices, work practices. I am so confident in American institutions, the ability to uphold the workplace environment, that even when you introduce new versions of AI that may replace humanity or whatever the case may be, that you're not going to violate human rights or abuse labor laws or whatever the case may be in the United States. I don't know about China, but I could care less about China at the end of the day until they do something stupid.
Remember, you're coupling it with deregulating industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Deregulating industry from what standpoint, though? Right. So like the Republicans have expressed wanting to deregulate certain regulations when it comes down to the work environment. But what are those?
Like the dumping chemicals in the water, polluting the air, or workman's compensation benefits.
But it's not necessarily that. It's even Elizabeth Warren agreed with me on this when I confronted her at the Capitol Hill on this, that they need to deregulate a lot of these stupid regulations that they put in place in the states. But also, she agrees with me in the federal, federal jurisdictions, like the parks and stuff like that, right? So,
there's crazy
so
shit.
I'm sure that they are doing some things that I may not be comfortable with when it comes down to the environment and dumping stuff in there. But at the end of the day, I haven't seen anything too crazy where it's like, okay, now the federal government's going to be able to just pour the worst of the worst chemicals into the most low-income unfriendly environment places in order to impact Americans that probably voted for Trump in the first place. So, I haven't seen any provisions or attempts to deregulate it. And I know this because Scott Turner isn't about this. Like the person that is in charge of providing these incentives in the first place opposes a lot of this stuff because he grew up in these areas and he understands what complete deregulations of industries will lead to.
I've heard good things about Scott Turner, and actually a friend of mine who Duke Tanner, who was just pardoned by Trump, just had a meeting with Scott Turner and Scott Bessent about a new project, like a new housing project thing, where it actually it would be, you know, people who are sort of who are in need of benefits, who would live in sort of a community housing, but it's a private company that owns the housing,
which I hate, because you know who owns those places? BlackRock. Vanguard.
So it doesn't have to be, though, right?
But they own 40% of the single homes, right? And who's going to get the contracts now to build the affordable housing? This is from my administration, right? BlackRock, Vanguard,
so if that's
State Street.
So then why do you trust them?
I don't. That's the thing.
But that's your administration.
I trust some things that come from the administration, right? You know this. I'm not a cultist. I have no ability to criticize the administration,
yes,
right?
Yes.
When I see them do stuff like want to do a mass surveillance program through an AI company that just so happened to prop up the vice president, I'll call out that corruption and we'll say this is an issue, right? So there's no problem, right? And what you should like about this is why I invite you to my side of the aisle, is that we have this wide variety of thinking on the conservative right, and nobody gets like, you're not part of the movement anymore. People that I hate on my side of the aisle, I respect the positions that they take, even if they disagree with me, and I'll never kick them out of my thing like that. That's why I want you to come on my side of the aisle, because your philosophy and your way of thinking actually will do well on my side of the aisle. I'm not trying to convince you, but all I'm saying is that we invite all various types of personalities.
And you're right, because I've been invited on Newsmax and News Nation, and I haven't been invited on CNN and MSNBC. And they invite me to talk, and I'll say, like, I play a Democrat on TV. Like, they invite me to talk about the Democratic perspective. And then I get messages on Twitter from Republicans that are like, thank you for having a Democrat with common sense on the show.
Yeah.
So I'm like immediately welcomed. Immediately.
The problem that I think that the conservative right sees, or I guess agrees on, regardless of where you're at, is that if there's corruption in the administrative state, we will call it out. So if it's the mass surveillance thing, we'll call it out. If it's given BlackRock, who literally implements ESGs, and we can talk about those as well, but they can change the behavior on the market, and we're going to grant them, through using taxpayers' money, the ability to own the affordable housing.
So I'm not saying in that program that it would necessarily be that. In theory, it's a wonderful program.
It is.
And so that's why I was trying to give credit to those guys, because I was like, they're considering a wonderful program that could really help people.
Yeah, you know? They guide, it's disguised as that until you realize who is actually getting those contracts.
Yeah.
When I learned that BlackRock is getting the contracts to build Ukraine, I suddenly started to understand why they're going so long under the previous administration.
I've been saying that since the beginning. I was like, why do you think we're funding the war in Ukraine so we can rebuild it?
Rebuild it, exactly, right? And people will say, well, why don't you feel the same exact way about Israel and Gaza? It's apples and oranges, guys. Just because they're both conflicts and they're both wars that the American industrial complex is entangled in, doesn't mean that you can apply everything directly to it. We can get into that as well. But the main thing is that when you start to look at stuff like, oh, they're doing affordable housing. Fantastic program. I like that. Wait, why are they affording it to BlackRock? Why would the Trump administration, who knows their base has a huge problem with BlackRock because BlackRock manages 80% of the 90% of the assets on the market? Let's actually talk about BlackRock for a second. The majority of conservatives believe that BlackRock
is owned by liberals.
Is owned by whatever the case may be.
Which is false.
Let me just take you through this interesting perspective. The majority of problem that the conservatives have with BlackRock is that they believe that because they supply the funding to companies, they can dictate companies what to do. Like Target, we're going to tell you guys that because we're going to abide by ESGs, we're going to have tuck-friendly like bathing suits for boys, or whatever the case may be. So a boy a boy that's a girl has a big bulge sticking out. Anyways, right? But the reality of it, that's not the case. BlackRock has an incredible program software called Aladdin. And through Aladdin, they manage 20 trillion assets, meaning that almost every single company in the world uses their software in order to manage assets. And on top of that, BlackRock actually manages $13 trillion worth of assets.
Right.
So people think these companies will do anything because when it comes down to funding, if they don't abide by BlackRock's values, they will lose funding. The last time Target depended on funding was 2008. So it's not really about the funding, right? And I say this, I'm applying this to everything, whether it's mass surveillance, affordable housing. It has nothing to do with the funding.
Ideology.
It's the technology, it's the software. And I tell everybody, people say Aladdin, isn't that like a movie? Aladdin is the name of the software that BlackRock created that all these companies use. So they don't want to go against BlackRock, whatever the behavior may be, because they don't want to lose access to that software. And when you have a problem like this, when you have this,
that's very interesting.
That's a problem, right? And that's what the conservative right totally misses. They think it's about funding. It's nothing to do with funding. It's technology. Make it full circle, Palantir. That is what they're actually going afterwards. It's not to enact whatever, philosophy Peter Thiel had 20 years ago about destroying the government or wherever maybe. It's the technology aspect of it. And as long as they hold the technology, they will befriend everybody.
So I think that's very interesting. Full circle on that, Michael Anton, who's the director of policy at the State Department, was the managing director of BlackRock.
Well, there you go.
And I know that we're gonna get a lot of comments from me saying like it's not owned by all liberals. That's part of the proof, right? I know that there are plenty of liberals who benefit from it, but there's this misconception that the billionaires in the country are all liberals and that they only fund liberal campaigns, and that's not true. What happens is that the people who have massive interests in what the government does and like what legislation gets passed, they will shtup money to whatever administration is in power. So if you look at the last 4 years of who's given money to
We've had a
Democrats,
total flip-flop. We went from Jeff Bezos being behind Biden to now Jeff Bezos being at the inauguration.
It's not about his ideology. It's about who he needs to talk to about being deregulated.
Well, okay, this is where you're wrong, right? You're framing this from a perspective of American politics, of he's not a liberal, he's not a conservative. Larry Fink is not a conservative. I don't think he's a liberal. Liberal means that you value individual freedoms, right? Individual liberties, sure. I would say, right? All these people are globalists. So they don't even think of it from an aspect of the populace or anything like that. It all comes from a point of view of the globalists. Centralizing as much power as they can in one or a certain organization. I know you're going to say
that's a Steve Bannon word you just used.
Well, that's what's happening, right? I mean, you use it all the time. You tell me that Trump is currently trying to centralize all the power in the executive and remove any checks and balances from the judicial branch. Okay, so now I want you to think about this from a large scale perspective, like the United Nations. My favorite thing to look at is the Davos Party. The Davos Party, the globalist form, the World Economic Forum, is a perfect representation of this with Klaus Schwab, Larry Fink, CEO of NVIDIA, Elon Musk, all of them getting together. And what do they constantly tell us? That individual liberties, it's a rejection of liberalism at the end of the day. Individual liberties have brought us to this point of where we have either white supremacy or whatever it is, right? No, I think this goes along with...
It's the flip side. I'm saying to interrupt you. I've heard the exact opposite, that they say that individual liberties have gotten us, this is actually Peter Thiel's thesis, have gotten us to a place to where we things don't make sense anymore. Like we've got boys who are girls and girls who are boys because of
too much freedoms to be able to choose and whatnot.
So it's the flip side actually is what I've heard from what you were saying.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that well, what do you mean? Because that's what I'm saying. The globalists are trying to make the point that because we've given too much freedoms, too much we've been overindulged in liberalism to the point of where people have been able to make so many choices because of the freedoms that now they've brought us to a point of where it's like, look at how bad society is. And that is a classic rejection of liberalism in order to swing us towards authoritarianism. Right,
so you're not saying globalist or liberal, you're saying the opposite.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't want you to think about it from a standpoint of these people like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, being a liberal or being a progressive or being a conservative or being a Republican or a Democrat. It is not from, it's a small thinking. You need to think about it from a large scale. And to these people, the large scale is a one world government. I know it sounds like a conspiracy theory.
No, it's not.
But that is what the World Economic Forum says every single time, that the elites know what is the right choice for the peasants, us, and that now they need to inherit as much power as possible and take it away from the people. And what do? They justify it through, look at how terrible things are because of all these freedoms. And that's I know you're going to say, why do you suddenly sound like a liberal or something like that? I'm trying to make you the point that this is the common ideology on the conservative right now, that we are attacked by these elites. That's why the Steve Bannons of the world had a problem with the Musks right off the bat.
But he doesn't have a problem. So here's my thesis behind all of this, because everything that you just said, right? You're absolutely right. I would say, why do you sound like a liberal? This is a long story. So here's what I think happened, right? Democrats for a really long time, or liberals since like the 70s, I guess, or 60s, have realized that this is all an illusion, right? That it's really all the corporations and the elites running everything. And that eventually, I think the elites realized eventually there's going to be so much information, access to information out there, that we got to get ahead of that, because the Republicans are going to realize it soon too, and they're the ones who are upholding the power structure, because the liberals want to tear it down. Mm-hmm. And the liberal, I guess, Democrat politicians were undermining their constituents by taking money from corporations. So I would call it corporatists, because, and to use another Steve Bannon word, but I never believed that Steve Bannon and Elon were on opposite sides. I thought that was a manufactured split. I still think they're on the same side.
Why do you think they're so opposed, right? Elon Musk values H-1B visas, like importing immigrants into the country solely based on skills, right? Skills. And then Steve Bannon realizes that H-1B visas is a scam when you see somebody working at 7-Eleven that is imported into the country
because
through
it's
an
not
H-1B
a big deal.
visa.
Because it's just not a big deal for them.
Why do you think, you should love this, why do you think that these corporations are importing migrants here on H-1B visas rather than hiring an American to work at 7-Eleven?
So I just want to get back to what you were saying before, though, really fast. So, and I'm happy to answer that. Yeah. But the issue...
He'll give you time to think about the answer. I'm kidding.
It's fine. The issue is that, and I know you trust that I'm not going to say something that's at least, I wouldn't say anything that's unfounded.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Everything that you just said, I believe, is J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel.
Okay.
Every single thing that you just said, which is the elites should be making the decisions. So you and I have talked about Curtis Yarvin. Mm-hmm. And
it's a perfect example of the person that rejects liberalism in order to drive more authoritarianism, or, for example, to centralize the power.
Exactly.
I completely agree with you.
Right.
There are a lot of actors on the conservative right who are trying to portray, and here's the problem, is that they diagnose the problem really well. It's just that the solution is terrible. I agree with them that you can critique liberalism, but when you start to critique it, this is funny, we'll talk about it in a second, but when you critique liberalism from a standpoint view of we need to limit it, especially individual liberties, you start to ask yourself, so what are you advocating for? Well, we're advocating for the executive to inherently have more power, because look at you idiots, you guys constantly mess society.
Exactly.
But there is some sort of value behind this.
You just said the opposite.
No. I told you this, that the diagnosis of it is correct. The solution is the problem. It's like Andrew Tate. He diagnoses the problem well. The solution is what creates the problem in the first place, right? You can't tell me that men need to be better men and then tell me that the solution is that they have 10 women who they will never have a family with, right? So the reality is that there are issues with liberalism, absolutely. But does that mean that we need to erode every single thing that our founding fathers fought for and that we had a revolution for?
Agree more.
Absolutely no. And that's when I start to ask myself, what is wrong with these people? And then I realize, okay, Peter Thiel, okay, he funded J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, says beautiful things and whatnot. But what does he believe in? He believes in rejecting liberalism in order to inherently provide more power to the elites, to a central government, to a couple organizations or whatever. I know you're about to be like, that is exactly what Trump is doing. But again, this is what you're...
to the dark side.
This is... Well, we've been there. We're inviting you to the dark side to realize that it's a uni-party issue and it's not really a conservative versus liberal.
J.D. Vance is the vice president.
The same exact thing was happening under the Biden administration. Let me ask you this. Why do you think companies or organizations like the Human Rights Campaign flourished under the Biden administration?
I think that it's...
to inherently give more power to companies like BlackRock, right?
I think that...
Let me ask you this. Why was the entire transition board for the Biden administration team to go from Trump to Biden were all tech oligarchs, right? Why did they all work?
Your fundamental assumption is that there's no truth to the environmental claims that we say are problems and to the human rights abuses that we say are problems.
I'm the one that's in favor of tariffs. I'm trying to remind you.
That's cool. But what I'm saying
What do
is,
you mean?
what I'm saying is because if you incentivize things that you think are going to make the world a better place because you truly believe that, and it's not about advancing the interests of corporations, which
Let me ask you, when
the
Stacey,
reason I left the Democratic Party is because I don't believe in advancing the interests of corporations, and too many of my representatives do that.
well, there you go. I'm glad that you came to the conclusion that it's not that the Trump administration is doing this. It's bad.
But it is.
But it's bad actors.
Exactly what it is.
It's bad actors around Trump's administration that are doing this.
He's the vice president.
I don't think that JD Vance is essentially promoting this in the first place, right?
Palantir is getting all of these. How can you say that? He's the vice president of the United States. They've asked him multiple times publicly, where have you gotten your ideology from?
One second. I'll explain this very easily. I'm framing this not from look at JD Vance. He's influenced by Peter Thiel, so he's going to usher in all this various stuff, right? Like a globalist policies. I look at what JD Vance is actually advocating for.
Sure.
And I look at the
I follow
policy.
that very carefully.
I look at the policies, and they don't resemble anything close to being a globalist thing, right? Let's first identify globalism.
The quotes.
Sure.
I will pull up the quotes.
I'd love to see this because the reality of it is that if we look at the left, let me ask you this. If they were trying to centralize as much power as possible, would they destroy federal departments?
Yes,
Why?
course.
Why would they destroy federal department? Why would they, let me ask you this. Why would they destroy something like the Department of Education?
Because
if they were trying to centralize as much power as possible to the federal government, why are they destroying federal departments?
Sure, because the Department of Education, they believe, is pushing a liberal ideology, even though they have no control over the curriculums and classes, right? What they actually do is they give money to Title I schools. It's like they're a middleman.
But all of that still exists. The Title I schools receiving funding still exists.
They're a middleman.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is that if you wanted to control the ideology, wouldn't you destroy all the state departments, inherit as much power as possible to the federal Department of Education? So if you want Title I funding, if you want grants for your universities, you're going to follow our ideology.
So here's how it works. It's actually different than that because we have a federalist system. So when you destroy all of the different channels through which things have to go before they get to the states, and it's just communication between the executive and the states, then what happens is, right, they say, we withhold your funding if you don't do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
Like University of Maine right now, all of their funding is withheld from them because the governor of the state decided, no, we're going to allow biological men to compete in women's sports.
And the Department of Education took care of civil rights in schools.
And the Civil Rights Department was just moved over to where? To the HHS. So again, all the main institutions that are part of actually making the Department of Education, the federal one, important, like funding. I agree with you. Low-income schools should receive funding. I think universities should receive grants. I think that there should be a civil rights department that will prosecute anything that violates Title IX.
And I agree
and that is happening right now at University of Maine. They're prosecuting Title IX abuse, right? So again, if the idea is that the administration, I don't disagree with you that he's surrounding himself with some bad actors, but I disagree that the driver of the administration, President Trump, is inherently wanting to centralize as much power as possible around the executive like a globalist would.
So Curtis Yarvin's ideology, which JD Vance has name-checked and used red-pilled and all of that stuff, and Curtis Yarvin was the one who came up with that term, right, has said the way to centralize power around the executive is to not just move stuff around, but to completely eradicate the federal government and to
but how does that make sense?
Let me finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is to eradicate the federal government and to just leave DHS and the Pentagon because then you can still have enforcement. So you come up with your own ideas, you sign your executive order, doesn't have to filter down through anything because now there's problems here and there and everything else. No, you put your stamp on it, you go, this is what's going to happen, send it down to the states, punish them if they don't. And so you've centralized and
centralized to what, two departments and
I'm
weaken the entire federal department?
And I'm also saying, right, that the federal government isn't just the executive branch, it's the judicial and the legislative as well.
But how are you going to hijack the judicial branch, for example?
Because through the media.
You got to destroy it. You got to destroy it, erode it, right?
Through the media. What they've been saying is these rogue judges, which is total bullshit.
This is the problem that I have, is that if we look at any country that has tried to centralize as much power as possible around one individual or a couple individuals.
Argentina, Hungary. I could go on.
Argentina?
Argentina.
Right now, under Javier Milei. Okay, how about you explain to me, why is it in the circumstances where individuals centralize as much power as possible that they can around one person or a group of people has always looked like as the growth of the federal government? For example, look at the Bolsheviks during their communist revolution in 1912, right? What did they do? They centralized all the power around one individual. They completely eroded every bit of individualism and brought it all to the central power, right? So you would think that in this case, wouldn't the government increase as much as possible? The federal government wouldn't establish as much federal departments as possible and inherit all the rights to them, right?
Good argument.
Because again,
Curtis Yarvin has the opposite
Curtis
philosophy.
Yarvin, so the Curtis Yarvin thing is different. Curtis Yarvin specifically rejects liberalism by pointing out at all the issues that modern society has instituted because of the choices and freedoms that individuals have.
No.
You don't have less choices because there's no federal Department of Education. The opposite, you have more, because now states don't have to say, okay, in order for me to get Title I funding, I'm going to have to comply with certain ideologies, or like we saw CRT, for example.
You just made that up. There's nothing that
Under Obama's administration, there was a specific curriculum that was instituted, CRT, critical race theory, that was brought from K to 12, and we know this. I say we know this, maybe I know this. That was pushed onto various metropolitan cities in order for them to receive their funding. It's the only way. It's the only way that Baltimore was able to do their experiment about, is this racism or lack of funding, is by instituting the critical race theory.
They chose to do that. That was a choice. There was no withholding of funds that they were supposed to get. They were incentivized to do it. That's different. Getting extra money.
Bingo. You said it.
Getting extra.
You said it.
Right, but Republicans do this all the time.
What did they do?
They've done this 3 different times when I was in the legislature last year. That they were like, we're only going to give companies that.
We're not talking about companies. Let's talk about specifically education. Companies is something different. I agree with that. But education is a little bit different.
Okay, what I'm saying is if a school wants to be an experimental school and they're willing to implement this to give it a shot, then they have a right to do that.
Okay, I'm not saying it's not their right, but I'm saying that if you're going to say that here, if you're going to implement the federal government's or the administration's ideology into your schools, we're going to give you extra money. That's bullshit.
I'm just saying I understand your argument about adding to the federal government, but the way that our government is structured, first of all, is different because it has checks and balances. And Curtis Yarvin's point, which Peter Thiel watched the election returns with Curtis Yarvin.
Yeah.
They're like this.
Okay, yeah.
And so
the bad actors that are surrounded around the administration.
J.D. Vance has said, if I ever have a moral quandary or I don't know what to do about a policy, I'm going to call Peter Thiel. So that's what I'm saying, right? And I understand your point, but what Curtis Yarvin is saying is we need to get rid of all of the inefficiencies so that there's a direct line of communication from the executive himself to the states.
I couldn't disagree with...
Because I've read his stuff.
With Curtis Yarvin, right? This is
yes.
More, right? I've already told you this. I don't like the conservative right movement that indulges in this rejection of liberalism. I indulge in it, but I critique it. And not from a Marxist standpoint, like some people got fooled into. But these people critique it from an authoritative point of view.
And that's who's
running
the government.
I want you to understand. It's okay that it's in the government. But
that's who's running the government.
But who else is in his ear? Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson is showing up there. Do you think that they're
all Curtis Yarvin people?
They are Curtis Yarvin people?
They are all Curtis Yarvin people.
Who? Stephen Miller?
Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon.
Okay, explain to me, right? So again, and I guess where we are running into an issue is that we fundamentally disagree what it means to inherit as much power as possible. I tell you that the bigger the federal government is, the more power inherits. You believe that a rote in certain Department of Education or certain departments and limited to just the DHS and the Pentagon is them centralizing that power. To me, it doesn't make sense because now they're giving more power to the states and their inability.
It's not more power to the states. It's the entire thing is that the states already had that power. It's the line of communication that changes.
Okay.
So that's the deal, is that you don't have all these inefficiencies in between, all the red tape.
You mean taking out the bureaucracy, the unneeded bureaucracy, right?
If that's what you want to call it, sure.
Well, that's the case. I mean, listen, for example, right? We know that Biden increased the size of the federal government by a couple million employees, right? Is it not okay to review that and say, do we need all 2 million?
Of course it is, which is why you could sell Doge to people who were going to end up losing their jobs.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, listen, at the end of the day, if your job is there because it was just created out of no reason and we evaluated that we don't need it.
I don't know if that's the case, but what I'm saying, because I know that we got rid of a lot of air traffic controllers and we need those people.
We got rid of probationary workers, meaning that they were there for a year, less than a year, right? So they were most likely
That also applied to promotions. That also applied to people who were promoted to a new position.
But that was, I know that talking point, but then it was all of, right? It's not like,
true.
It's not like you've been here for less than a year. We didn't look that you were actually promoted and you've been here for 10 years. We're going to take you out.
That is
right?
what happened.
That is not what happened.
That is what happened.
I had a person on my TikTok live when she works in the, Department of like Agriculture or whatever it is. They're cutting lots of people out. And there was an original list of people that they were going to cut. And what did they do? They said, hey, listen, if you're a probationary worker just because you've been promoted, but you've been part of the department more than 2 years, that is the standard. So that means that people that were hired by Biden's administration in 2022 we're still able to be part of the Department of Education.
This is exactly why getting rid of the bureaucracy, that if, like your label, is how...
What is a bureaucracy?
Is how they're centralizing the power under the executive. Because, right, if you have policies and you're trying to bullshit the American people, and you send this policy down and you say, okay, if you were here for 10 years, you get to stay, then they have to enforce that policy within that agency, right? If that goes away and it's just the person at the top that says this is how it's going to be, then they control it. There's no filtering down of things and allowing things to happen that makes sense. If you want to do some crazy shit at the top, you're going to get it done without it being filtered down through different channels and different mediums.
I wish that you could, I could remember this guy's name, but did you see how many steps it's required in order to just be approved to build an affordable home?
Yes.
And this is from the Inflation Reduction. Ezra Klein, thank you for reminding me.
Ezra
He did
Klein.
a beautiful piece,
He
right?
did a beautiful piece
And
on
people
it.
are like, what is going on? Why does it take so long in order just to have a permit?
It makes no sense. But
Wait. Why doesn't it make sense? Aren't you in favor of so much bureaucracy at the end of the day, right? Because all these levels serve as a check to make sure that nobody is getting screwed all over the place.
No one is in favor of bureaucracy that doesn't make sense, right? And the average person like me doesn't know what all the steps are.
Okay, and that's subjective. That's subjective. That's the problem, right? Is that you will tell me this isn't enough bureaucracy, but this is. When Trump cuts bureaucracy, it's not good.
No,
but
I'm
with
saying
Biden,
when Trump cuts all bureaucracy.
Well, he's not cutting all bureaucracy.
That is what I'm saying he's eventually going to do.
Okay, we'll end it with a prediction. How about that?
Okay, that sounds good to me.
So we can move to immigration.
Yes.
But this is good. I'm glad that we
great.
found another topic that we could get heated like this about.
But my ultimate thesis,
conclusions.
Though, conclusion.
Teddy snoring in the background.
But my ultimate conclusion, though, is that we can agree that we don't want corporate elites running our government. I believe that Steve Bannon has convinced the world that liberals are the corporate elites who are running the government. And I'm saying that the people who are running the government right now, like J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel, who are the big tech oligarchs, that's who we should be afraid of, because they're the ones that believe in authoritarianism and they think that we're too stupid to make decisions for ourselves.
You got to watch a little bit more Steve Bannon, because this is like the craziest thing I've ever heard, that Steve Bannon is somehow actually propagating or in favor of the globalist elites. He's the one that's been going after them.
Do you know how he made all his money?
Films, speeches.
Wall Street.
Yeah.
He was a Wall Street banker, and he bought the rights to Seinfeld.
So he was in the swamp, and he saw for himself the issue that the populists have with the elites.
He sold the mortgages that he shouldn't have sold in 2008 and then left right before it crashed because he saw what was going to happen. He's a piece of shit human.
Okay, if he did that, that's one thing. But again, what I'm telling you is that the ideology that he espouses, you can't even remotely say that that is something that appeals to elites.
I'm saying that he's full of shit. I'm saying that he's lying.
Well, anybody can be full of shit. I can't vouch for him
for
that.
He says the opposite of what I'm saying.
What I will say is that if that was actually the case and he was a grifter, he would have cracked a long time ago, just like all these grifters. Just like the Candaces.
Reason why Donald Trump was elected in the first place, and I think it's because he ginned up all of the
all the people that voted against Trump and funded against Trump.
The
reality
of
it. How did he swing Trump back 15 points? He literally took over 45 days before the election. Was like, what was it, 15 points?
That's not what happened. What happened was, and we can move on after this, I'm sorry. But what happened was, he came to Trump. What he did was he saw that 4chan had a whole bunch of people on there who were very angry. And he has his
What were they angry about? Immigration.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Black and brown, it was a lot of racism, and he will admit that. Okay,
I agree. But the reality of it is that Steve Bannon came in mainly, he didn't come in. He understood
why Donald Trump's there.
I totally get that. From 2010, they saw the opportunity in Trump. In 2012,
correct.
Jeff Sessions brought Steve Bannon to meet Trump in Trump Tower. And Steve Bannon was surprised at how much Trump actually knew about one specific topic, and it was China.
Steve Bannon chose Trump.
I agree with you. Well, they actually chose Jeff Sessions, but Jeff Sessions isn't charismatic.
No.
You need a charismatic populist
Because
leader.
Steve Bannon has his own ideology that he wants to execute, and he will do whatever he needs to do in order for that to happen, which is to have a hierarchy to society.
No, the ideology is that the power will be centralized in the populace, and the reason why
That's what he's saying, but he's lying.
I mean, he espouses classic populism that's based on nationalism,
and that's why people get so excited about it. But he's lying. That's not.
I don't know if he's lying. I mean, like that's just an assumption, and I don't really care to debate the assumptions of it. All I'm telling you is that since I've known Steve Bannon, he's been firm on taking the populist side of this whole populist movement.
And I think that's a convenient move for him, because he knew that it would gin up all those people that he saw had this anger.
That's the whole concept.
Let me finish, please.
Let me just say this. The whole concept of populism is to see what are the grievances amongst the population.
Yes, I don't disagree.
And at the time, the grievances that the majority of Americans had in 2015 was immigration. And this is why build the wall was a slogan that stuck throughout the entire campaign. They tested different ways of it. But again, the reality of it is that Steve Bannon is a strategic genius. He understands that if there's grievances, if he understands there's grievances and mainly resentment among the American population,
exactly right.
if you can capitalize on
that is evil.
So you think Obama was evil? Obama did the exact same strategy.
I am not here to debate anyone else's presidency.
I know.
I'm talking about this right now.
I know, but I'm saying is that if you don't like politicians capitalizing on resentment and grievance, it's not racist. It's legitimate resentment, and we can get into the immigration right here.
And saw somebody commenting on the riots that said another example of black and brown people fucking up this country again.
Okay, is there racism amongst the American population? Sure, that's what I'm talking about. But
that's what he capitalized on.
I want you to understand the reason why Democrats lost the last election is because they tried to do this exact same thing. They tried to invalidate legitimate resentment, grievances the American population has,
and we're about to talk about that,
and try to portray it as racism or misogyny or whatever the case may be.
And that's
right?
how they win, right? That's how the other side wins. So let me just
capitalizing on what people's concerns are.
No,
sounds legitimate to me.
Let me explain.
Go ahead. I'll sip my water so I don't interrupt.
Thank you, please, because I'm dying to say this. So Steve Bannon is what's called a traditionalist. Don't believe me? Read Benjamin Teitelbaum's book, because Steve Bannon has signed off on the book. Okay, and he interviewed him multiple times, and he is the world's leading expert in traditionalism. Traditionalism comes from the Hindu caste system belief, right? And if you listen to a lot of Steve Bannon's talks, he says things like the warrior caste or the merchant caste, right? Because that's what he believes in. He believes in a hierarchy to society, and he's frustrated that one doesn't exist anymore, and he believes in the fourth turning, right? And a lot of people who are watching this will probably realize that this is something he talks about a lot, right? It's the fourth turning. The problem is that he doesn't want the lower class to be the ones dictating the policy, because that's essentially what happens with the fourth turning, right? Different hierarchies at different times, this is the theory, dictate what the morality should be, right? And so he doesn't like that it's the populace that's doing that. So what he has done...
But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I know, but I just have to point this out. I'm sorry, but
I'm saying he's full of shit. I know he says he's a populist. I'm telling you he's full of shit.
But he says the complete opposite of it all.
I know he says the opposite.
Okay.
I'm telling you he's full of shit. Here's how I know. Okay.
We took a little break to change out the batteries, and now we're back. So Steve Bannon.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Here's the deal. Steve Bannon claims to be a populist, and he espouses populist rhetoric. My thesis is that he does that so that he could create a base for Donald Trump, and that he doesn't actually believe in that. He just knows what's going to work, and he knows what's going to work because of Cambridge Analytica. So what happened was, right, he was a Wall Street broker who got out at the perfect time, right? Because he sold bullshit mortgages and then left immediately. And then he became a big tech venture capitalist, and he worked on 4chan. And if you don't believe me about what I'm about to say, you can check it. It's in Benjamin Teitelman's book, War for Eternity, which Steve Bannon has signed off on, right? He said, I saw that there were a lot of people who were quite, upset about the people who were not Americans in this country, and I thought I could capitalize on that. So I created Cambridge Analytica. And what he did was because he has his own ideology, and his ideology comes from this theory called traditionalism. Again, fact check me. Traditionalism is a theory that believes that there should be a hierarchy to society. And this is something that he believes in, because at this point, right, at different times, according to this Hindu theory that traditionalism is based on, right, and he learned about all this stuff when he was in the Navy, different castes are in control of the morality at different times, and they set the standard for what's acceptable. He doesn't like that the people who he thinks are on the bottom floor, right, the peasant class, is deciding what is the best thing for people. And he thinks that it should be somebody else in charge, right, just like the corporate elites do. So again, if you don't believe me, fact check me. So he wants to get a candidate into power. And so he creates Cambridge Analytica to figure out, how do I grasp these people, because they're upset and I want a candidate in power that will execute my ideology in the thing that I care about. So he researched for 3 years, and he took money from corporate elites in order to be able to execute this, and a lot of money from Wall Street. Also bought the rights to Seinfeld, right? And he was able to, and totally broke privacy rights to do this, right? And gleaned a ton of information, brought the information to Trump and said, want to be president? And that's what happened. And now, right, what he did in order to get Trump elected was he created an angry base of people, which is the same thing that Curtis Yarvin capitalized on, because he has this blog called Unqualified Reservations. He wrote under a pen name called Mencius Moldbug, and he was part of the 4chan people who were upset. Here's the deal. The reason why they want free speech is not because of anything other than they want to be able to say that there's a correlation between skin color and IQ. Curtis Yarvin believes that black people are inherently violent, and that there's a race war going on in this country, and that we need to be able to say it. And Vivek Ramaswamy dances around that. When he was on that podcast I love, what's it called? Flagrant. He was like, I don't know why we can't just say that different types of people are good at different types of things. I know what he's talking about when he says that, because he's dancing around it. It's just, it fits so perfectly.
Well,
and,
I mean,
so I think he's continuing this radio show where he's continuing to take money from Wall Street. He's continuing to work with corporate elites in Hungary, in Argentina. He's constantly still making deals and getting all of his money from Wall Street. And pushing corporate elites into power, right? Because that's who's running the government right now. And that's the administration that he's standing for and upholding and pushing, while he's telling people, yeah, thanks Obama for not, for not paying attention to us and not caring about us. But if that's what he actually believed, then he would live his life very differently, and he would be upholding principles and pushing people into government who actually cared about the things that he says that he cares about. So I'm done. That's it.
Like who?
I don't care, anybody, and not Biden, okay?
Okay. So just to address that, because I'm not here to defend Steve Bannon, I think that I used to call myself a populist nationalist until I understood that it's a pretty weak ideology, because Trump was supposed to be a populist leader, but once you inherit power, you're not a populist anymore. You're amongst the elite. So populism to me is a very weak ideology. Whether he's a grifter, he's doing this because he has some grand scheme of to inherit as much power as possible or create a caste system, whatever the case may be, I don't know. Interesting thesis. I'll definitely look into it.
And I do think the caste system fits with the new Catholic movement, which goes along with Candace Owens, Jordan Peterson, and J.D. Vance.
The main thing that I was going to say is that the one thing I see that Steve Bannon avoids, that the Curtis Yarvins of the world don't avoid, is indulging in a form of critical race theory. Remember, critical race theory doesn't just apply to the left, it also applies to the right.
I think this is all about critical race theory, because they're obsessed with wanting to control the truth. That's why they want the universities. J.D. Vance in 2021 said Nixon was right when he said the universities are the enemy. He never considers that any of the ESG stuff could actually be the truth, right? He never considers that it could be true that we're actually corporations are actually polluting the environment, and so they're telling us that global warming or whatever you want to call it, climate change isn't real because it financially benefits them if it's not, right?
Well, listen, there's a reason why they went from calling it global warming. They totally abandoned the term global warming and went to climate change.
Democrats are
and
cowards.
No, it's because nobody disagrees that climate changes. For as long as we've known climate has changed, it's actually a really great way to reposition yourself from a stupid term like global warming.
It was a stupid term.
It was. I'm glad that we agree with that. And I'll also just say this. When I see the Obamas, the Gates family buying beachfront properties, and there's no clause in their insurance that says if water raises a certain amount of money, you'll get your assets back. To me, it seems like the people who propagate the most and then fly on private jets while telling us that we have to control our carbon footprint actually agree with me that it's all bullshit. I don't disagree that there's maybe some sort of effect that humans have on climate, and that's why climate changes. Sure, but to do a crazy 180, and we're not going to talk about this, but to do a crazy 180 and completely change society in order to fit this narrative that they have is crazy. But let's talk about it before cameras start to die and whatnot. Immigration. And you and I got into a little heated battle yesterday over the LA riots.
Yes.
You might call them protests. I call them riots. There's no such thing as
protest turned riot.
Perfect. I love to say that, right? It's something that begins as a protest that ends up as a riot.
Protest turned riot.
There's no such thing as mostly peaceful protests, right? That's a crazy...
Yeah.
That's okay, great. Because when I see... They did that yesterday again. They're like, these are mostly peaceful protesters. And I'm like... There's no such thing as mostly peaceful. It's either peaceful or not peaceful. There can be bad apples, whatever, however. Anyways,
That's
doesn't matter.
Way to start. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to rewind a little bit to talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia because the story just gets better and better.
I'm talking about that on Fox 9 today, actually.
Oh, perfect. Maybe I can give you some talking points. April 28th, you and I sat down. We debated. There's that great clip of you telling me I don't feel any compassion, stuff like that.
Yeah.
A couple weeks later, we sat down and did the debate again, and you pretty much said, we both found out after the podcast that he had these domestic issues of abuse, right? He said, I'll never die on the Hill for somebody like this.
Right.
And I love that. I absolutely love that. But now Democrats received the biggest win of their lives. Guess what? Kilmar Abrego Garcia is coming back to America. But he's not coming back to America for the reason that Van Hollen or whatever his name is sat down to have margaritas with him. It's to face a federal indictment that his fellow Americans saw the evidence and said, yeah, let's go ahead and indict him on human trafficking. There's 10 years worth of evidence, one of it is on camera, of Kilmar Abrego Garcia transporting individuals from the border who are here illegally into various parts of the country for over 10 years. Now he's returning to Tennessee to face that federal indictment for human trafficking. I just want to know, how do you feel about this?
Yeah.
And overall, what is the look of the Democrat Party now?
Yeah, so I've been saying this for the last 2 weeks on national television, that Democrats need to give credit where credit is due and give up shit that they need to give up, right?
It's hard for them.
If they want to gain any credibility and be able to tell Republicans you're lying to your people, then they have to stop lying to us. So I think... obviously, none of us knew. You can't hold Democrats responsible for not knowing that that
he was transporting
humans. Right,
because
nobody knew that. And
sure, absolutely.
Nobody knew that. And it is very convenient. And as a lawyer, it's very true that a jury could indict a ham sandwich, right? Everybody gets indicted. That goes before that. So I'm waiting to see the evidence because it's very convenient because they said, and as you know, the White House misled people about what their capabilities were in bringing him back, about what their what the judges said that they had to do and what they didn't have to do.
Sure.
They straight up lied about it, and now they have to, instead of tucking their tail between their legs, right, they have to give some reason why they're bringing him back. So it's quite convenient that this is what happens. So again, I have not seen the evidence. I am going to go ahead and put my trust in the jury system and say that they indicted him rightly, because I trust the jury system. But again, you can indict a ham sandwich. So it's like the bond, or it's like the bond hearing thing, right? I'm not going to say that this person is guilty because the judge denied him bond, or because this person got indicted. It doesn't mean that they actually did anything wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so
innocent till proven guilty.
Right. So my feeling on all of this is it's very convenient, because what the court said they had to do, the judge said, the Supreme Court of the United States, the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, said, you need to bring him back. And that every single person that was on that plane that was accused of being in Tren de Aragua, including the gay makeup artist, who for sure was not in Tren de Aragua, need to come back and get their trials, because this is not legal. And it's not what we stand for as Americans. And so they were like, well, fuck, now we got to bring him back. But we're going to look like assholes. So we got to do something that makes it look like we're bringing him back here on our terms and not because the judges told us to.
Okay, hey, I like that conspiracy theory. We'll call it that.
That's how I feel. That's what I think.
Yeah. Hey, fair enough.
So I definitely have a message for Democrats, though, about all the riots.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Do you think all of this could have been avoided if there wasn't a fundamental disagreement between you and I that when an individual comes into the country illegally, that makes him a criminal? Because I think, right, I've realized that over the last few episodes that our fundamental disagreement lies with that.
Yeah.
Is that I believe in violation of 8 U.S. Code 1325, that makes you a criminal. And I think that finding all the loopholes in the world, maybe that's why you do it because you're a lawyer, but finding every loophole in the world to justify why they did that is it doesn't make sense to me, because it leads you guys towards the same thing with Kill Marbury Garcia. And now maybe that's the same thing that you're getting led towards with these LA riots, protests turned riots.
Let me ask you a question then, because this is something that I don't understand. Why do you think that Democrats want illegal immigrants to be able to stay here?
I don't think that there is some conspiracy or like a certain intention of why to bring illegal immigrants into this country.
Staying.
Or to stay and stuff like that, right? There's great theories about the consensus, right? And we know that to be true, right? Especially, listen, if you start to drive these people into red states, suddenly to blue states, you're going to increase their electoral points, right?
Which has been studied and is not accurate. It's shown that it
what
has
is
been,
not accurate about that, right? If we have 10 million
the
illegal,
it's had on an election.
But let me ask you this:
it's changed one seat in one election.
But let me just ask you this: 10 million new incomers.
And
I'm not going to call them
the census. They account for that in the census.
But the population of the state increases when there is more immigrants that came into this state, right? So in the process, when we check up and we see, okay, wow, you increased from 1 million to 1.6 million or something like that, right?
Then you get more seats.
Right? So in theory, this could be a thing, right? I'm not saying that's what Democrats are doing. I've always actually stayed away from saying Democrats are intentionally doing this.
I appreciate that.
But they do incentivize it. And I'll explain what I mean by this. Under Biden's administration for 3 years, all he did essentially was incentivize illegal immigrants to come up to the southern border, and he de-incentivized them to actually enter the country legally through the port of entry. Why? Because he wouldn't enforce immigration laws like this administration does. Within 30 days, we saw a drop of more than 99% without a single bill, without doing anything but enforcing the laws on the books. So when you see that happen, you start to look at it and you say, wow, they give people that came into this country illegally some special program so they can have temporary protective status or something. You start to realize like they're not deterring migrants from coming to the southern border. They're incentivizing it.
I think just to be very clear, I only know about policies from the last 2 years of his administration, and I'm not here to defend what he did. I think the fact that they refused to acknowledge that there was a crisis at the southern border lost them the election. So,
well, they only wanted to acknowledge it when it was political season, and that's the problem. And this is what I mean to talk about the resentment and the grievances among the American population. When you have an administration that denies the reality that people in New York City feel when their entitlement programs or budget is allocated towards programs that are not meant for them, they're pissed off, and obviously they have grievances. So if I was running for politics, I would capitalize on those grievances as well. But let's go back to the immigration.
So with the riots, right?
Yes.
So here's message. I have two totally different messages on this. I know we don't have a lot of time. So the first message is, I don't know why Democrats feel the need to fight for the rights of those people who looked like they were for sure gang members and burning cars to do so. You either condemn violence or you don't. Were there peaceful protesters there? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly. And I would be proud to stand among them.
Okay.
But stop defending people whose behavior you don't support. Like
in the name of due process. And
well,
I'm
no,
sorry
I'm not
to
saying
say
due
that.
process here. I'm saying, and I hear what you're saying about comparing it to due process.
Yeah.
But, and I agree with you, actually,
No.
to an extent, because I'm not big on prisoners' rights. But
Yeah.
like I said, I passed that to someone else because I recognize it's important. It's just not my thing.
You trust the institution. I agree with
Right,
you.
right.
Yeah.
So that's part of it, right? Stop going on Twitter and saying, well, what did you expect? No, you either support a violent protest or you don't. And that's how I feel about it. So gain some freaking credibility back. The second piece of this, though, which is the reason why I would be proud to stand among people protesting, is that the Trump administration is arresting legal immigrants who did nothing wrong. And here's my message to people. If you're somebody who said, I'm fine with legal immigration, I'm just not okay with illegal immigration, what now? Because they are arresting legal immigrants.
Let's unpack that claim real quickly. What do you mean what do you mean that they're arresting illegal immigrants?
Legal immigrants.
Yeah,
They're arresting
legal.
immigrants.
People that came into the country illegally.
Yes.
Explain to us, what is the administration doing that is detaining legal migrants and deporting them?
Sure. So the program under the Biden administration was called the CHNV program. And it brought in, it's Cuba,
Honduras, Nicaragua.
Cuba, Haiti.
Yeah.
Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Right? So there's another.
Not Haiti, it's Honduras actually, but go ahead.
I thought I saw Haiti.
Let's see. Just so we have it pulled up.
Yeah. So
you were right. Sorry.
Haiti.
Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans.
And now there's a separate program, the TPS program for Venezuelans. That's
Absolutely.
not this program. Right?
And let's
This
just
program-
clarify it. 350,000 Venezuelans are impacted by the TPS for Venezuelans.
Correct.
This is about 550,000 for the
so
Cubans.
These people were in their own countries,
Mm-hmm.
right? They were brought here legally,
Yep.
right? They were fully vetted. They had sponsors here. They
What did they come to the country for? What is that program specifically for?
work. It's just
Okay,
whatever.
so it's a work visa.
and
It's a special program for individuals from these nations
Right.
in order to come
And
to
they
the
needed a
country and
sponsor
work.
already.
And they needed a sponsor,
and
exactly,
so
who
they-
will financially support them. Absolutely.
These 550,000 people followed all the rules, right?
Yep.
Then, right, just as it was President Trump's right to do, he canceled the program, right?
So he terminated the program that the previous administration
Correct,
created.
which he's allowed to do. The law says that you need to give people 60 days to get out, right? Because it's unreasonable and inhuman to cancel somebody's program and say, you gotta go right now.
Although
right?
every single country, including Israel, does that. When you come to a country on a work visa, if they were promised 12 months and on the ninth
Then you plan to leave after 12 months.
No, one second. If you were promised 12 months as a work visa and that on the ninth month it was terminated, every single country that I care about, like a Western civilization country that allows such programs to happen, you are immediately
Why would it be
deported out of the
terminated?
country. For whatever reason may be, right? This Department of State decided that we don't need this program anymore, so we're going to
Okay, so I'm not talking about that.
There's no, like, why did they terminate? They terminated, when did they
Then that
terminate
sucks
this
too.
program?
Then that sucks too.
Yeah.
So this
It's just following the law.
There was an executive order that terminated the program, and then in April it was officially terminated.
Yes, April
So
5th.
Actually, this administration did more than give them 60 days. They published in the Federal Register, which is how you give notice officially. Doesn't even have to be in Spanish, right? You give notice officially, or whatever language.
That this
it would
program
be, right?
ended and that you can self-deport out of this country just
let
like
me
anybody
finish.
would. Go ahead.
Let me finish, right? They said everyone has until October of 2025 to leave, right? They gave them more time than they needed. They gave them until October of 2025. That was the published date. And now there are people who are getting arrested off the street and detained who are on their way to volleyball practice, who are going to pick up their kids. I have examples here that I can pull up of 3 anecdotes, but there have been hundreds that have been arrested that are associated with this program. So now, right, what the question I want to ask is, why are we arresting legal immigrants?
Well, let me explain this to you. I'm This is just a fact check. No, the Trump administration did not give an extension for this program until October. It terminated the
It's not an extension.
It was a federal registration notice on March 25th, 2025,
Right.
announcing the termination of the parole programs effective April 24th.
Sure.
And that's it.
Right.
That's
No,
it.
but they gave
There
them
was
until October 25th to leave.
But okay, you told me the legal notice is 60 days, right?
No, I
one
said
second.
they have to give a minimum 60 days. They gave them till October.
I don't see that it says that. It says the original date for some of the earliest entrants to the program where parole expired was October 2024.
Nope, October 25. I'll show you right here.
I'm reading it right here, right?
I got it. I got you right here. Okay.
So maybe it's two different sources, right?
Okay.
And so here's what, again, it says, no, the Trump administration did not give an extension for the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan,
Right,
Venezuela
they did not extend the program.
until October.
No, they didn't extend the program till October.
One second.
No,
Instead,
but your
I
question
know,
is
and
fundamentally wrong.
I asked the Trump administration give till October an extension for individuals
That's not
who
the
were
question.
terminated. You said that a person was terminated. They terminated the program, and in the official registry, they said you have till October to leave.
Right. So there's not an extension of
where
the
can I
program.
see? Where can I
Go
see?
in the federal registry?
Okay.
So it's not an extension of the program. It's you have until October to leave. That's their notice.
Okay, one second. They terminated the program.
Right.
So
And they
listen,
gave them till October to leave.
if I go to France on a work visa, and they were telling me originally you have 12
Is France
months.
America? This is an irrelevant
One
comparison.
second. It's any Western civilization country that allows work visa programs. This is a work visa program, right? Did they have some path to citizenship after this
Yes,
program was
absolutely.
terminated?
It's constructed with a path to citizenship.
Okay, let's read it together.
But
right?
I haven't even finished the thing I was trying to say.
One second. The program allowed for temporary stay for up to 2 years, during which paroled individuals could live and work in the United
That's
States.
TPS.
That's not. Look, CHV, whatever, you know. Oh, oops. I just want to make sure the audio is going. The program allowed for a temporary stay for up to 2 years. This is a normal work visa. That the only different thing about this is that it is special for certain nations. Now, let me explain to you, because my friends came here on work visas. At any point, the Department of State can end a program or totally terminate your own work visa without terminating some program. As soon as that happens, you immediately are supposed to leave the country and return to your country of origin. Unless the only reason why you can stay in this country, and if we scroll all the way to the bottom, it can say that, is if they have secured protection from deportation through another legal status.
Sure.
So if these individuals who are in this country go to a court and say, hey, I know this program ended, but now please allow me to stay in the United States, they will give them temporary protective status in order to adjudicate their asylum case. I mean, this is just the reality of it. This is why it was a work visa program. A work visa program doesn't allow you to come. H-1B visa holders, they come into this country for educational purposes. After they're done with their education, they have to apply for some other legal status in order to stay in this country, or they overstay their visa and stay here, or they self-deport themselves. Not self-deport, but it's like you literally, your time ended here, adios. It's that simple.
Okay, so let me pull this up, because my point is that they told these people that they had until October.
Again, I understand that they were told by the previous administration that they have till
they were
October.
told by this administration.
No, it says right here. The previous administration extended their stay. It was controversial that they extended it in the first place. Whatever, they extended it. This administration said, we want to terminate that program early. They terminated it early. A lower court blocked that. The Supreme Court came in a few days ago and said, you guys can terminate it. And upon termination of the program, the individuals who are eligible for the program immediately are self-deported. You can look up any country. If you're there on a work visa, and the second that program ends or is terminated, your visa is terminated, what do? You can't sit there and say, I was promised to be here for 3 months. Now you have to give me those 3 months. That's ridiculous. If the State Department terminated the program, terminated your visa, you didn't take any step within those 60 days to apply for legal status, whatever that legal status may be, unfortunately, you get deported. It's not that you are deported. You get on a plane and you go back to Nicaragua or Haiti. Now, here's the thing. I agree with you on this. If a person in Haiti is like, or once that is terminated and their visa is like, or the person's like, if I go back to Haiti, they're going to kill me. That's a legitimate asylum case, right? What happens when you have a legitimate asylum case in the United States? You apply for it. You get temporary protective status while you adjudicate the asylum case. There you go. It's beautiful.
Okay.
All right.
So
A little do I need to monologue a little longer?
No, okay, so sorry, thank you. So the 2025 Federal Register notice was the formal termination setting the April date for parole to end.
Okay.
So these people, right, it wasn't that they were told by the Biden administration this, it was that they believed, according to this executive order, right after it was terminated, once they published it in the Federal Register, they gave them extra time to leave, but they're still arresting them. And it's not just that they're sending them back home, it's that they're tearing them off the street.
And again, this inhumane compassion card doesn't work with me. You should know this. Again,
why?
Because it's very simple. Again, if I was to go to Israel on a special program because of a work visa, and they just so happen to terminate that program while I'm there, and they promised me to have 3 more months, I don't know what else to tell you. You know, the program ended. You were promised additional months. You don't get those months, and you get deported out of the country.
I don't understand what you're saying. So you're saying you reasonably believed that you had 3 more months?
No. I came on a program that was established by a previous administration, right? That said that you can come and work in this country for 2 years. But then a new administration came in and terminated that program earlier.
Yes.
It's the law. It's literally the law. What am I going to do? Say they promised me 6 months, and now I'm going to force the Department of State to extend that visa for me?
So that's not what I'm saying. Okay. I'm saying that these people
were promised to be here on a program till a certain amount of time. That program got cut earlier. And just like you would in any civilized country that respects the sovereignty of the country, as soon as that program is terminated, you leave that country. Or you do what I said, which is only a privilege in America, is that you can secure protection from deportation through another legal status. Now, can we agree here is that if you came here from Haiti because there's just no economic prosperity there whatsoever, and now you want to stay in America because you got a taste of economic prosperity, should you be able to stay here because of that?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't agree with that. So, I only agree in the case that they actually feel real persecution or death in their country, because that's a legitimate asylum case. Economic prosperity isn't a legal asylee thing.
So here's what changed in 2025, right? The March 2025 Federal Register notice ended the program itself, meaning no new applications are accepted.
Okay.
No extensions or renewals of parole, right? Because the paroles are already granted, but existing parole grants remain in effect until they expire naturally.
What did the Supreme Court rule, though?
The Supreme Court ruled that there was no stay on ending the program, so they could go ahead and do all these things.
Okay. I'm almost positive, and you can correct me on this, is that they emphasized in there that listen, when you terminate the program, that means that the visas of individuals that are here under this program, it's not that we're not going to accept those anymore. It's just that those program is now terminated.
That's wrong, though.
Just like if I came here on a H-1B visa, which is a work visa, and H-1B visa was terminated tomorrow, what do you think is going to happen to the what is it? It's like 200 and something thousand H-1B visa workers in America. Okay. What is going to happen with them?
So that's not the law, though. What you're saying just isn't the law.
Okay.
So that's the deal, right? Okay. So the October 2025 thing that I'm explaining is the last date that people who were most recently granted these visas have to get out.
It's since 2023. It's not applying to the 2021 case because the Supreme Court hasn't read an opinion.
Let me explain,
because